Welcome to the lecture on Hosea. So Hosea's name means salvation or deliverance or perhaps help. And we have his children's names that are going to be important in here. Jezreel, which means God scatters. Lo Ruhama means no mercy, no pity. And Lo Ami means not my people. And of course, they're going to drop the lo, which means not, and you'll eventually have mercy. Ruhama means mercy or pity, and Ami means my people. And Hosea is the author here. The birthplace is unknown, but he may have been a native of the northern kingdom. He knew it well, as evidenced by his writings. He could have been from the region of Benjamin, due to specific mentions he has of that, or that area. But he mentions Judah only generically. His father's name was Beri, which means my well, and Jewish tradition holds that his father was a prophet also. The date for the book is the same time period as Amos, pretty much, but he's contemporary with Isaiah, so a little bit later. 750 to 725 would be the time period before the fall of the northern kingdom. His purpose is to prophesy concerning Yahweh's future redemption of Israel. And you have this great imagery of Hosea told to go marry Gomer, a woman of harlotry. And he has children of harlotry, and they are images of God's judgment and then restoration as well of the people of the northern kingdom people. Political occasion, there's a resurgence of the Assyrian Empire about 745 BC, the Syro-Ephraimite War, 734 BC, the fall of Damascus in 732 to the Assyrians, and then we have the impending destruction of Samaria in 721 that's following shortly after this. We have a succession of kings from Jeroboam II on that are, quite a few are usurped or killed by another person, and the dynasty changes. So there is no ongoing leadership. There's a lot of power-hungry men that are killing off the previous king and then taking over. Religious context, there's corrupt sacrifices to Yahweh. So there's syncretism. They're still worshiping the idol calves, these calf idols, golden calves at Bethel and Dan, but they're offering sacrifices to Yahweh. Initially, that stuff was those two sites were supposed to be worship of Yahweh, and there's syncretism, and so corrupt sacrifices to Yahweh are going on. Idolatry is going on with the calves of Dan and Bethel. There's fertility cult going on, and maybe that Baalism is creeping back in because that's part of the Baal cult. Gross immorality is going on, and it's reflected in the marriage that Hosea is told to go and participate in. The purpose of the book is to prophesy concerning Yahweh's future redemption of Israel. But this image of Hosea's marriage to Gomer is an image of Yahweh and his relationship with Israel as well. So it is a sign or a symbol of God's great love, that even though Israel has gone into harlotry of idolatry and that sort of thing and has left him, yet he will bring her back and restore her to himself. And he commands Hosea to do this, even though Hosea doesn't really want to get into this sort of relationship. God commands him to marry this woman, and they have children, and there's all of this that goes on. And she goes into slavery eventually, and he has to buy her back, and so he has to redeem her, and he does so and restores her. At that point, not only is she in a covenant relationship with him as his wife, he also owns her. He has bought her back and restored her to himself. So the major views, the way Hosea's marriage is dealt with, some want to look at it as allegorical, symbolizing God's relationship to an unfaithful Israel, and that there never really was a marriage. Some want to look at this marriage as Hosea marrying a literally unchaste woman. She's already unchaste. And he marries her, and she's already into this type of fertility cult thing or other sexual relationships before marriage. He's told to marry a woman of harlotry, and he did. So they take it as, well, that's what she is. and Israel itself, as far as the connection there, it was not chaste. Even when they came out of Egypt, they had idols and things. Then the third way to take it is spiritual infidelity, that Gomer became a worshiper of idols only, so she was spiritually unfaithful. But that doesn't seem to be the case either. The fourth way is that she was a literally chaste bride, and so the marriage is literal, but Gomer becomes unfaithful and eventually is sold into prostitution after the marriage because she leaves him and gets involved in all this stuff. Some say that this view would be inconsistent with the literal view of Scripture as it is written, but Israel never was chaste. So I'm of a mindset either she was already unchaste or that she became unchaste. In any case, the result is the same. You have a relationship of the prophet marrying this woman, and she leaves him, and the children are perhaps not even his, and they are he's to name them as images of how God's going to deal with Israel. So this marriage is a symbol or type for God's relationship with Israel, and so it's a hard thing what he does in restoring her to himself. Most would not do that, but it shows God's great love in a very impactful way, because in our human relationships, that unfaithfulness is hard to get over. But Hosea is a great picture that a marriage can be restored, and it's perhaps right to do so. Not perhaps, it is right to do so, to go that extra mile, because that is a permanent covenant relationship. But it also reflects how far God goes in restoring us to himself, as far as he doesn't have to seek us out. He doesn't have to offer redemption and through Jesus Christ and all this, and he does. And he wants a relationship with us despite all of our sin, because as Paul says, our righteousness is as filthy rags to God. So it shows this great image of a loving God who restores his people to himself. And while we are not, as Christians, we are not biblical Israel, we are grafted in, the way I take it, to spiritual Israel. And so we are a part of that promise as far as how God treats people and how God treats his people. In any case, God is redeeming us through Christ. And yet while we were lost, while we were walking away from him and not following him. And so this image of Hosea marrying Gomer and her being unfaithful, and then him drawing her back and restoring her to himself, is an image of God doing the same with Israel. It's an image of God doing the same with any believer, because we were all lost without him and without Christ. So the imagery here, the literal nature of it as a type and that sort of thing is very impactful and very important, and you should preach and teach from this book, because it's so common for marriages to be harmed and to be damaged by this sort of behavior or other behaviors, which, if this seems to be the worst, then it can be gotten over with God's help. Restoration can come and can take place within marriage. Restoration can happen between people and God. So Hosea projects a dilemma, that there is a divine necessity to reject Israel because of sin. But there's also a reluctance upon God to destroy Israel because of his love for her. And so Hosea proclaims Yahweh's resolution of the dilemma, and that Israel would be punished, but he eventually would restore them, and Israel would be preserved. So punishment, in Hosea 1, 4 through 9, he talks about the names: Jezreel, God scattering them; Lo Ruhamah, I will not have compassion on them; Lo Ami, you're not my people, I am not your God. Yet later he talks about how Israel will be like the sand of the sea, and Yahweh's love would evoke a response in Israel, and he would heal them in 14, 4 through 5. He would love them freely, and he would assume responsibility for their sin in 13:9 and following. Israel would be restored again. And so God is showing his great love and his great compassion for Israel and for individuals here. When you look at the structure of the book of Hosea, there is a unit that in chapters 1 through 3 that's somewhat allegorical construction consisting of a prologue, an argument, and an epilogue. And then 4 through 9, chapters 4 through 9, there's oratory where there's some imperatives where he gives imperatives that project forward. And then in chapters 10 through 14, there's a narrative that is symmetrically aligned in integrated units. So he changes his style, but he's presenting the message, so the same message. So it's interesting. In the center of the book is indictment and judgment upon Israel who do not know the Lord, yet in the end there's a renewal of covenant and the marriage renewal as well. So there are 15 times references to Judah in the book, though most of it's in the north. Again, he's talking to them about their covenant relationship with Yahweh and being restored to that. And Israel, or the marriage, symbolizes the covenant between Israel and Yahweh. But it's not until after the exile that Israel, or Judah and Israel, become monotheistic. They actually finally get rid of their idolatry after the exile period. Let's see. The three causes for Israel's unfaithfulness are mentioned in chapter 4. That there's no truth, there's no covenant loyalty among them, and there's no knowledge of God. So those are scary things to think about. But again, preach and teach Hosea as far as restoration of marriage, restoration of covenant, restoration of relationship with God. It shows the hard issues of life, and the hard things are forgiveness, mercy, restoration, and that God leads the way in this. He wants his prophet to lead this way, and he himself restores us this way. See you next time.